Good evening, everyone. We begin the readout tonight with some scenes from Washington, D.C. this weekend. You're looking at a group of more than 100 white supremacists called the Patriot Front, who marched around outside the Lincoln Memorial on Saturday night. Their goal, they say, is to reclaim America on behalf of their white ancestors. And according to the Anti-Defamation League, they openly define themselves as fascists. Now, if they seem familiar, that's because they were among the extremist groups at the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia, though they changed their name after one of their members murdered Heather Heyer with his car. Of course, their extremist views and ridiculous plastic shields earned them lots and lots of mockery this weekend, especially when several were awkwardly left stranded at the Arlington Memorial Bridge because their U-Haul wasn't large enough to carry them all home. Indeed, they looked really stupid. And it's easy to laugh at them. But to do so would be to underestimate them and the millions like them whose radical ideas are on the ascent in this country. Let's not forget the many who laughed at Donald Trump back in 2016, and even after he was elected. Thanks to 4 years of Trump, this country is now a backsliding democracy, according to an international think tank. And that is no joke. The truth is, this country doesn't have a great track record of recognizing authoritarians for what they are, at least not until it's too late. According to Smithsonian Magazine, Benito Mussolini was a darling of the American press, and American papers credited Italian fascism with saving Italy from the far left and revitalizing its economy. Similarly, Adolf Hitler was dismissed as a joke, a nonsensical screecher of wild words, according to Newsweek at the time. American press outlets predicted Hitler would be outplayed by more traditional politicians or would become more moderate. In other words, they got it wrong, badly wrong. Now fast forward to the current day, and we're seeing a similar pattern emerge when it comes to the threat of Trump's big lie. As Barton Gellman warns in The Atlantic, state Republican operatives have been building an apparatus of election theft under our very noses. He notes that if the plot succeeds, the ballots cast by American voters will not decide the presidency in 2024. Thousands of votes will be thrown away, or millions, to produce the required effect. The winner will be declared the loser. The loser will be certified president-elect. That will be the end of democracy as we know it. This American experiment with multiracial democracy, well, that will be over. And yet, for much of the media in this country, it's been business as usual, despite that looming threat. As columnist Dana Milbank writes in the Washington Post, too many journalists are caught in a mindless neutrality between democracy and its saboteurs, between fact and fiction. It's time to take a stand. For his column, Milbank actually hired a data analytics company to measure and compare media sentiment toward President Biden and toward Donald Trump. He found that Biden's press for the last 4 months has been as bad as, and for a time even worse than, the coverage that Trump received for the same 4 months of 2020. Not only that, but Trump got roughly twice as much coverage in 2020 as Biden has received in all of 2021 so far. Milbank notes that the country is in an existential struggle between self-governance and an authoritarian alternative, and we in the news media collectively have given equal, if not slightly more favorable treatment to the authoritarians. Dana Milbank joins me along with Jason Johnson, professor of journalism and politics at Morgan State University and host of the Slate podcast, A Word with Jason Johnson, along with Nancy McLean, historian and author of Democracy in Chains, The Deep History of the Radical Right's Stealth Plan for America. Dana, I am going to start with you because I noticed that the response to many Beltway media people to your piece was to fight with you about being mean to their particular media entity, right? You had people from Politico yelling at you on Twitter saying, you said mean things about Politico. And it's like, that's not the point. And I feel like you kept trying to make the point that this isn't about, saying mean things about one media outlet's coverage. It's literally the overall impact of their coverage. You wrote, Biden is attempting to salvage democratic norms. The people opposing him are using fascist tools of deception and voter disenfranchisement. Neutrality in the struggle is not a virtue. I heard you and high-fived you on Twitter. I just want to let you go. Talk about what you've seen from the inside of what this media is doing, in your view, that's helping authoritarianism thrive.
Yeah, Joy, I certainly didn't mean to suggest that it's a problem of one outlet or another, or this one's better than that. Sure, some are better than others, but that's not the point. This is, I mean, think about it. Comparing the last 4 months to the 4 months of 2020, when Donald Trump was threatening to not honor the results of a free and fair election, and then ultimately didn't honor the results of a free and fair election. He was embracing the Proud Boys, white supremacists. He was embracing QAnon. I mean, he was sabotaging the post office. So this is, and at that period of time, he got similar to even more favorable coverage than Biden is getting today. So I think that's astonishing. And look, people in my business, I support this notion. We like conflict. We're combative. We like to hold the powerful to account. But we're in a whole different game here. It's not Democrats against Republicans, it's small d Democrats against authoritarians. And as you noted at the beginning, in many ways, we're losing this struggle. So I agree with reporters not being partisan, but we should be partisan when it comes to democracy. We should be partisan when it comes to the facts. And I think that's where I think we need to take a stand.
Right. And, Jason, I've long said that the media's only real bias, at least the mainstream media, is toward change and conflict, right? Donald Trump was entertaining for a lot of Beltway journalists. He was also open. He gave lots of leaks. His administration gave you lots of data and lots of sort of conflict-driven, content. He was a content creator. And so there was whereas when I remember when Barack Obama was in, the media generally disliked the Obama administration, even though they were not doing anything dangerous. He couldn't even wear a tan suit. The media would go ballistic and go nuts over him because he wasn't accessible, because he was seen as cold and not really accessible. There was no access. My challenge here, and this goes all the way back to the way the media operated in the 1920s with Mussolini, is that the media underplays the danger when a political party is out of step with democratic norms, and they overstate the horror when a Democrat generally, or somebody who's more of a normal politician, does anything that makes them annoyed, right? Anything that irritates sort of elite journalists. I'm worried that that tendency is always going to help the Trumps of the world and always going to hurt the Bidens. And that's not good for our democracy.
Joy, you're exactly... No, it's not. And Dana, you're underselling yourself. No, thank you. Thank you for being someone who actually said this. And quite frankly, there's a racialized element to this as well, that I'm happy that you're the individual who said this. Because this is something that black journalists have been screaming about since Donald Trump got into office. When the man ran basically saying, I'm going to clear out this country of anybody who's not white and straight, it took 3 years for large numbers of media outlets. And I'll say the names, not everybody at these particular outlets, but The Hill did this, and Politico did this, and the New York Times did this. We've all talked about this for years. It took almost 3 years for most of the mainstream press to say, hey, this guy is an actual existential threat to democracy. And people who talked about it, especially journalists of color, were called alarmists or told they were being extreme. And then it literally took a man trying to overthrow an election and then send terrorists to try to overthrow the results of the election in January for a lot of folks to realize it. It is a problem. It is a danger. Is it entirely the fault of the media? No, it's not. But it is in part the fault we don't hold each other accountable. And when people want to get angry at the messenger, instead of taking responsibility for the messages that they've been spewing. This is arguably one of the most important articles of journalism I have seen in a very long time. I'm so happy that we're bringing this to the fore, because as we go into 2022, and a lot of the things that they've talked about in the Atlantic start to manifest themselves, when you see in Georgia and Oklahoma and in Texas, where large swaths of votes are going to get thrown out the window, if we don't establish the language and dialogue necessary to point these dangers out, then we will have stolen elections, and 2024 will already be done.
Yeah, and Nancy, and I don't know if we can pull back up this picture. I mean, you had a group of white supremacists who admit to being fascists, who are proud of it, march at the Lincoln Memorial. This does not become an alarmed story of existential crisis, whereas Hillary Clinton's emails about her risotto were the absolute obsession of the media. And again, I don't want to pick on one particular outlet, but the New York Times literally ran an excerpt of the book written by Steve Bannon's partner and ran that as if it was like huge breaking news with alleged wrongdoing from the Clinton Foundation that wasn't even real. But there is this sense that Democrats get held to this sort of normal standard, and they get just attacked for any little deviation, a tan suit, emails that you don't give the media access to. Whereas this latitude that we, and again, not every outlet are giving Republicans, includes trafficking in fascism, anti-Muslim attacks that could get a literal member of Congress killed. The latitude is so wide. Right. Can you try to help us understand why that is happening?
Yes. And I want to thank Dana, too. That was just an incredible article and so important and needs to be read by everyone, I think, because many of us were saying, what's going on here? The coverage is so imbalanced, and the attacks on the Biden administration and saying Democrats are divided. No, they were legislating. They were doing the hard work of trying to get important things done for the American people. And I think so many in the media, mainstream media, Joy, you are such a breath of fresh air, but seem not to have any sense of history, of political science, of what we need in this moment. So we know from the work of scholars who have studied how democracies slide into authoritarianism, this doesn't come with, clanging armored tanks and generals, strutting around in most modern countries and in most places of serious democratic backsliding. It comes when the rules of democracy are shifted and rigged in order to ensure the triumph of a particular party. And we know that authoritarians do things like reject the democratic rules of the game. They deny the legitimacy of the other side. They encourage or tolerate violence, and they show a willingness to curtail the civil liberties of their opponents. All four of these things are now characteristics not only of Donald Trump, but of the modern Republican Party. We're in a situation in which we have to remember this. There are only two Republicans who supported the looking into the impeachment into the attempted coup on January 6th, only two Republicans who voted to censor Representative Gosar when he promoted violence against Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And we could go through many other things, but they, as Jason was saying too, they are systematically trying to get control of election administration in almost every state they control so that they can rig the election, possibly as early as 2022, but certainly in 2024. And in those circumstances, as Dana has suggested, and as you're all suggesting, to act as though normal media norms of neutrality apply is to participate in the destruction of democracy before our eyes.
Let me read a little bit from Barton Gellman, who you should also read this piece, all of you who are great readers out there in the Atlantic. He says, Trump and his party have convinced a dauntingly large number of Americans that the essential workings of democracy are corrupt, that made-up claims of fraud are true, that only cheating can thwart their victory at the polls, that tyranny has usurped their government, and that violence is a legitimate response. And Dana, I think you are getting at that as well. And here's the challenge. The Republican Party is an almost monoracial party. So they are directing that message at a specific group of white Americans to terrify them into thinking their country's being stolen by people who look like me and Jason. And then in order to stop that, anything is okay. My challenge is, we as the media have got to point out that is not normal Republican politics. My father loved Republicans. He was a big Reaganite. That is not normal Republican politics. It's something outre. Why do you think that is it because the media has been so terrified by the right calling us liberal media and making up the idea that the media is liberal? Is that it? Is it fear? What do you think is holding people back from telling the truth about it?
Some of it may be fear, and some of it may just be returning to the previous business as usual. That was sort of the default position before. It just no longer works now. And the piece by Bart, I think, is terrific. It's because of the big lie. It's not those clowns marching in Washington with their Captain America shields. They're clowns. There are tens of millions of people who are no longer on board with the Democratic experiment. experiment. There are at least 10 states, including Arizona, Texas, Georgia, and Florida, that, as was just referenced, have given politicians essentially the ability to overrule the vote of the people. This could happen in 2024. There are signs that this is exactly what's going to happen. We can't sit there and say, oh, that's bad on the one hand, but, well, it's just as bad that Joe Biden can't pass his social infrastructure bill. They're not at all on the same equation.
It's on the one hand, on the other hand. Nancy, just because you wrote a whole book on this, I'm going to give you the last word on this. It feels like the on the one hand, on the other hand tendency. The media does not want to be at war with Republicans. They never wanted to be at war with Donald Trump. The media doesn't want that smoke. There's something else they want, but it ain't that. Is that going to allow us to just wake up on January 2025 without our democracy and wonder what happened?
Yes. Absolutely. If that both sidesism continues, we are in absolutely dire straits. And I personally, and as you point out, I've written about this, I've researched this. This is not about liberals versus conservatives. No. This is actually not even about Republicans versus Democrats. The Republican Party has been captured by dark money donors and who have fed red meat to that white base for so long now that people have left the factual universe. We saw today from NPR that the death rate from COVID is now 3 times higher in states that voted for Donald Trump. And the more they voted for Donald Trump, the higher the death rate. These are people who have left the rails of science, of constitutional democracy, and all the incentives, and this is important to understand too, all the incentives in their world push for continued behavior. The more outrageous these members of Congress get, the more their social media ratings go up, the more money they bring in. So we have got to find other ways of sounding the alarm. And our traditional media could be that vehicle, but to do so, they're going to need a hard looking inward of the kind that Dana has so rightly suggested is well overdue.
Absolutely. And then that's going to be a very difficult turn. But I'm so glad to have you all on to talk about this. Dana Milbank, thank you for writing that piece and fighting the good fight. Nancy McClain, thank you. Everybody should read your book. Jason Johnson is sticking around.